guess so.
Yeah.
Yes. They're going to be here and then over there. We're waiting for Joe. Good afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome to Calvary Church and to our Common Ground guest speaker series. We're so happy that you're here. First, a couple housekeeping concerns. The exits are in the back of the church where you came in. There's also an exit in case of emergency out this hallway behind me to Cayuga Road. The restrooms, there's one restroom in the reception area. There's more restrooms down in the basement and upstairs, and there's an elevator to take you either way. In a moment, Father Robert will open us with a prayer. Then I will introduce the speakers. Each speaker will take 15 minutes to speak to you, and then we'll have a question period about half an hour. Please hold your questions. Well, don't hold them. Write down questions that you have on one of the cards that you'll find in your pew or you were given, and hold it up, and one of the ushers will collect them and bring them up so I can hand them to our panelists. So, Father Robert.
We're going to offer a special prayer today for Litany for Healing, and I'm asking, when I say the phrase, "Hear us, O Lord of Life," if you would repeat it, I'll say it throughout the prayer, and then if you would repeat it out loud, and the word again is, "Hear us, O Lord of Life." Let us pray. O God, you are the source of life and light and love. Everything we have is from you. And your will for us is wholeness in body, mind, and strength. Lord, grant your healing grace to all who are sick, injured, or disabled, that they may be made whole. Hear us, O Lord of life. Hear us, O Lord of life. Grant to all who seek your guidance, and to all who are lonely, anxious, or despondent, a knowledge of your will and an awareness of your presence. Hear us, O Lord of life. Hear us, O Lord of life. Mend broken relationships and restore those in emotional distress to soundness of mind and serenity of spirit. Hear us, O Lord of life. Hear us, O Lord of life. Bless physicians and nurses and all healthcare workers and those who minister to the suffering. Grant them wisdom and skill, sympathy and patience. Hear us, O Lord of life. Hear us, O Lord of life. Grant to the dying peace and a holy death, and uphold by the grace and consolation of your Holy Spirit those who are bereaved. Hear us, O Lord of life. Hear us, O Lord of life. Restore to wholeness whatever is broken by human sin in our lives, in our nation, and in our world. Hear us, O Lord of life. With you, O Lord, is the well of life, and in your light we see light. Hear us, O Lord of life. Hear us, O Lord of life. God, we thank you for your presence among us today. Bless our speakers, and we seek your wisdom and your guidance in our world through Christ our Lord. Amen.
And we are honored today to have 4 outstanding speakers. Mike Bellani is the former general manager of the Buffalo Bisons. Dr. Dory Marshall is the chief medical officer of Oishei Children's Hospital. Mark O'Brien is the Erie County Commissioner of Mental Health. And Baby Joe Macy is Buffalo's own former undefeated heavyweight boxer. Mike?
Thank you very much, Dale. And as you heard, each of the speakers gets 15 minutes. And to keep us on track, we have Melinda here in front with sheets to show 1 minute left and then a stop sign. So Melinda, I'm going to make your job a lot easier. I'm going to tell you that don't start the clock yet. I have a little homework before we begin the talk, and then we'll get into the 15 minutes. But first off, Pastor, I had the honor of being here this morning for your service, and the verse in today's gospel about love and treating everyone like you'd like to be treated is really my favorite verse in the Bible. So I thank you for that. My second favorite verse is also in the book of Matthew, Matthew 25, that reads in part, "When I was hungry, you gave me food," and ends with, "Lord, when did we see you hungry? When did we see you naked? When did we see you homeless?" And he responded, "When you give to the least of my people, you are giving to me." And that's really what I always try to live on. And I think it's a great verse, and this church does a wonderful job with that. So thank you very, very much. I'd also like to welcome a parishioner of yours and a dear friend of everyone, former New York State Senator Mary Lou Rath. Mary Lou, thank you for being here. Her former Chief of Staff, Marina Woolcock, and the two of them back a few years ago really broke the ceiling for women in Albany. And if you think Albany is a tough place to be, ask those two afterwards what it was like being tough women representing this area, and they never backed down. And we're happy that Mary Lou's offspring, Melinda Sanderson, is still working. She was hired by Governor Cuomo, Mario Cuomo, his wife, came up with a mentoring program, and she's still delivering that to students throughout New York State. So thank you for being here. Another Melinda, the timekeeper, start the clock. I welcome all of you, and I thank God for this opportunity to be here with you today, for those here in the church and those watching in the back. And I commend Calvary Church for developing this amazing Common Cause speaker series. I especially applaud Joan and Dale and their team for the tireless efforts they've put into this for months to make this presentation a reality. This afternoon's topic of the state of mental wellness in Erie County is so timely. And with Dr. Dory Marshall, the Chief Medical Officer of Oshchai Children's Hospital, Mark O'Brien, the Erie County Commissioner of Mental Health, you have two experts to address this important issue. You may be asking, at least I did, with those two experts, how does an undefeated heavyweight professional boxer and a former general manager of the Buffalo Bisons get to be on this esteemed panel? Well, Baby Joe, a dear friend who I admire greatly, you'll hear his story in a few minutes. As for me, I go back to my food bank days with Calvary Church and its loyal parishioners when I stood right here talking about our walk-off hunger and the state of hunger in our community. Sadly, that is still a big problem, but I'm here today to talk about an even bigger issue, one that affects 1 in 4 of us, mental illness, or as I am now referring to it as, brain health/mental health issues. And I am in that 1 in 4 category. Many of you remember when I was general manager of the Buffalo Bisons and when we opened the downtown ballpark in 1988. A few years later, my career ended after a near-fatal bicycle accident in Canada 31 years ago. I know this church joined many others in praying for a miracle, which occurred in the trauma unit at ECMC after 17 hours of surgery. What you probably do not know is among the many injuries I suffered was a slight fractured skull. And if I wasn't wearing this bike helmet, and back in 1992, the only people that I knew wearing bike helmets were in the Tour de France, but the owner of the bike shop just sold me a bike a month before the accident. And listen to his prophetic words. He said, "You love to ride at night, and if you hit a pothole and hit your head, we couldn't afford to lose you. So you better get this helmet." And I said, "I'm not going to spend another $100 on a helmet." he throws it to me, and in a book I'm writing, the editor changed it to say it was the best catch I ever made. Because when I was hit from behind at 60 miles an hour, wearing the helmet, I went slamming into a metal news box so hard that the fiberglass on the inside shattered, and the front of this went into my head and obviously, rattled the brain. If I wasn't wearing this, they told me when I finally came true that I'd either be dead or a paraplegic. They wanted me to take all of 1993 off, but I didn't listen to the doctors, because who else could run the Bisons if I wasn't there? Well, God has a way of telling you to slow down, and less than a year later, I had a near nervous breakdown that put me out of work for over 8 months. And during that time, I began experiencing bouts of depression and manic behaviors. They diagnosed it as bipolar disorder. I wish Dr. Dory was around back then, because I think she would have dug a little deeper than the 5 minutes they gave me with the quick analysis. And that began the alphabet soup of antidepressants. When I asked what bipolar disorder was, the psychiatrist said it was a mental illness. I didn't hear another word he said. All I did was tell myself I would never admit to anyone that I had a mental illness. That's how bad the stigma of mental illness is. Nearly 10 years ago, after someone said something rude to me while I was in a depressive state, I decided to do something about it. I got into my car and went to the thruway near the Hamburg exit. I got out, opened my hood. In case a cop came, I would say I had car trouble. I had planned to throw a baseball cap onto the road when the next semi rolled by, which I saw way down the thruway. However, out of the side of my eye, I noticed a truck from where I work pulled up, because he recognized me and my car. And the driver asked, "Car trouble, Mike?" Without answering, I looked up and said, "Now what, God?" As clearly as we are talking today, God told me to use the tools he gave me to help end the stigmas associated with mental illness and to continue helping those in need in our community. I then called the former president of ECMC and told him I needed to see the best brain doctor in the country. Amazingly, ECMC had just hired Dr. Mark Levecki, a brain trauma expert, and for the second time, my life was saved at ECMC. Dr. Levecki re-diagnosed me, checked my records from back at the accident of what it did to my brain, and told me that I don't have bipolar disorder, and all those antidepressants I took, did nothing for me. But what I did have was a traumatic brain injury. And if I took my meds regularly, eat a clean diet, exercise daily, get 6 to 8 hours of sleep, manage my stress, and continue praying, I would live a life I never imagined. I said, "Well, shouldn't everyone do that?" He said, "They should, but they don't. But for you, if you go 6 for 6 every day on that, or close to it, you'll live a life you never dreamed." He was absolutely right. And today, some 10 years later, I'm doing what God told me to do after that failed suicide attempt of working to end the stigmas associated with brain health, mental health issues by writing a book called My Miracle, which hopefully will be published next year. I'm also on the board of Recovery Options Made Easy, a peer-based mental health advocacy organization, and I'm happy Marta Hishevsky, its marketing advisor, is here with us today. So I'm active in that field and speaking out about it. I'm not ashamed to tell this story and to admit what I have gone through over these years. The reason I do that, and the goal, is to have others be able to open up. And the ultimate goal is to have society accept brain health, mental health issues the same way cancer, diabetes, and other diseases are accepted. I'm living proof of someone who has been living with brain health, mental health issues, but is now living a great life I never dreamed of. I owe a huge thank you to my wife, Debbie. We've been married 17 years, and she has endured the behaviors of someone with these conditions. And to her credit, she has always been there to listen, console, and support. I truly love you, Deb. Communication and acceptance is what we need today. When someone in your family, your workforce, or just a friend seems a little distant and says everything is okay, keep pushing them to open up. Talking is key to getting someone out of a depressive state, and it is vital in saving someone from suicide. And in the back, Commissioner Mark O'Brien has a number of materials and phone numbers and places you can call. You've got to get aggressive in helping someone because they need help, but they won't admit it because of the stigmas. The term brain health, mental health issues comes from a book that I'm reading from Dr. Daniel A. Amen, and it's spelled out in the book called The End of Mental Illness. And from my standpoint, the key is being able to communicate just like this and telling someone. And when I've done this, I've had people come up to me and tell me about, their friend, and I know they're talking about themselves, and I'm not going to, ask them that, but it's important you tell somebody. And that's my key thing, is just communicating. So I thank you very, very much for being here, for listening, being attentive, and take the messages you hear and take them out on the street and tell others. Thank you. Melinda, how many minutes did we have extra?
4 minutes and 52 seconds.
Joe, we're going to give you 4 extra minutes if you need it. Baby Joe Macy is a retired heavyweight professional boxer who was forced to retire in 2007, 3 years after suffering a subdural hematoma during a fight in Las Vegas in which he won. He'll tell you what would have happened after that fight if the brain bleed didn't occur. He was 36-0 as a pro boxer with 20 knockouts. He headlined a sold-out boxing card in Buffalo's downtown arena. In 2008, he ran for New York State Senate, and in 2018 was elected into the New York State Boxing Hall of Fame. He's a member of the Greater Buffalo Sports Hall of Fame, and he truly was Buffalo's 3rd professional franchise. On November 17, he'll be speaking at the Buffalo History Museum from 6 to 8 p.m. on Evening with an Icon, and we have these cards in the back. But ladies and gentlemen, let me please welcome my dear friend, Baby Joe Macy.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thank you, Mike. Thank you all for coming, and I won't be long. We want to hear from the experts, Mark O'Brien and Dr. Marshall, but thank you to the Calvary Episcopal Church for hosting. And like you said, you might be asking, what does Baby Joe exactly know about mental health? We want to hear from the experts and hear the resources. I'm just here to share my brief experience with it. It's important we share with each other. And, I won't be long, but, Mike mentioned years ago in 2004, I had the controversial ending of my boxing career. You said I won the fight. I don't remember, but I don't have much memory of that evening at all. But whether my bout of depression stemmed from the head injury or it stemmed from the fact that I felt like my career was taken away from me after 16 long years of hard work and overcoming setbacks, and I don't know what it came from, and it's kind of irrelevant. That discussion could go down many different paths. As I was talking to Mark O'Brien, and we didn't want this to become about head injuries. And as Mark shared, he had a handful of head injuries himself. It's kind of irrelevant, and that can go down a different path. But after 15 years of investing my life to become heavyweight champion, and just that night I won, gave me that opportunity. I was going to fight for the heavyweight championship of the world, hopefully bring that title to Buffalo. I was going to make millions. I was in for a life that I don't think any of us would have ever expected, and it was, what I had worked hard for. But after the Nevada State Athletic Commission told me I'm never to box again, we could talk about all the ups and downs, my life kind of quickly spiraled downward. And I wasn't at all optimistic about beating the system, the political system, and receiving a decision from Nevada that would allow me to fight again. It turns out I really just quickly let myself go in every way possible. I mean, I started abusing everything, and I made excuses, and I felt sorry for myself. But I was legitimately lost and confused, worried about myself and what my future would look like. What was I going to do with my life? Throughout this time, my mind was all over the place. I mean, I could see, but I had no vision. Here's what I dealt with almost daily from people in the community, kind people. Some believers were telling me, Joe, start training again. You're going to fight again. They have to let you fight. Some folks were telling me, Joe, forget about boxing. There's not a shot they're ever going to let you in the ring again. Just bringing a lot of confusion. Are you crazy to want to box? You could die in the ring, because I didn't know what the right thing to do was. Or Joe, maybe it's just time you look for a new career. I said, career, like a job? Like I'd never worked. But now thinking back, I was proud of many of the obstacles I had to overcome during my boxing career. They made me stronger, and they made me a better person. They made each win I had even bigger and better. But how naive of me, or any of us, to never consider or prepare for the worst. I'm always reminded of the quote, you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. So this leads me to the part of the story that many people don't know. Because without even realizing at the time, I just sank lower and lower until I don't really know what to call it. Looking back, I sometimes wonder, was I suicidal? But the fact that I have to ask myself that, I think I had somewhat of a death wish. The crazy thing about this, other than my weight gain at the time, you really couldn't see this. You couldn't see it on my face. You couldn't see the stress. You couldn't see the confusion. I hid it well with booze and drugs and nightlife, making it appear like I was living the life, but just still unaware of what my future would look like. Not prepared for life without boxing. I could share a few rock bottom stories with you, but that would be irrelevant because, we're really here to hear what I eventually learned from this experience. And if you're struggling or know someone who's struggling, we have to realize that we aren't often here on earth for the reasons that we think we are. What might look like an unraveling of a great plan to us doesn't always pan out to be what our higher power has in store for us. And we have to believe that there's a reason behind it. We have to. I now believe that I have a different purpose and different goals here. And this is why he gave me the tool to box. It wasn't the goal to box. It was just the tool. One day, during my lowest, I remember I was at church, and I was desperate for answers. And so I had just received my communion, and I was about to kneel down in my pew and just pray for thanks. And I'm sure pray for something silly, like, God, let me fight for this world title. How can they take my career away? Selfishly, I want that $1 million. And when a woman walking by, she looked distressed and teary-eyed, and she tapped me on the shoulder. She quietly said, "Thank you, Joe," she whispered in my ear as she's walking back. And I said, "Thank you, for what? Who are you?" She said, "You visited my daughter, Lisa, a few years ago at Children's Hospital. You took photos with her. You gave her some boxing gloves, and you told her to keep fighting. She'll always be a true fighter and champion. And, she always thought the world of you, and you were just so kind to her. And she said little Lisa happened to cherish those gloves. And once they were home from the hospital, they hung them over her bed. And every night they'd pray and say they were fighters like baby Joe and that they'll get through that time. And she said, I was like a superhero to her. And I was all she talked about. And I asked how Lisa was doing, while at the same time putting my foot in my mouth. And the distressed mother told me, she told me she had lost her a few months earlier. So I was really caught off guard. And I just sat back in my pew, and I began to slowly glare at all the bowing heads deep in prayer, while realizing just then, and figuratively and literally, that God only knows the desperation and the pleading cries for help and the answers that are needed, the cures and the bills that are not paid. And it just must be never ending. I actually couldn't believe what I had been praying for, not really ever being grateful for just the gifts that I had been given. And I don't mean the gifts of being athletic or the gift of having gotten to travel the world and having to met some great people, but the simple gift of health and just opportunity. And the special gift of simply touching someone in a way that you may not even know that you did. So it was then that I realized that the good Lord didn't put me on this earth to box. I mean, what kind of sense does that even make? It was when I looked at life and our world of opportunities, or lack of opportunities, differently. Sometimes we just need to alter our thought process a little bit. You may have lost your job, but what an opportunity you have. Maybe you didn't make the team. Well, what an opportunity you have. So you didn't pass the exam. Well, what an opportunity you have. You see, we only know what we know. Look, I'm not saying there's not a mourning process for us all at times, and even the fear of the potential change that is ahead of us. Because after all, it's okay to find peace and happiness through change, as long as we see our setbacks and our failures as potential opportunities. And in many cases, when everything's taken away, what is it that actually defines who we are? Was it our relationship? Was it that test we didn't pass? Was it the job we lost or didn't get? Absolutely not. It's not. That's not what identifies us. Your identity is going to be tied to whatever you give your heart to. Look, we're all on a journey here, and on this journey, we are all given challenges and obstacles. We all have ups and downs. We will all experience illness. We'll all experience loss. But the best part of our journey is that we are all here together. We're not alone. We have resources available to us, which we're going to hear more about. And look, it's not very riveting. This isn't riveting news, but once I opened up and I talked to a friend who is now my wife, and then spoke to a professional, and then turned to my faith, everything just suddenly looked different to me. I could now see, and I had vision. So my favorite scripture is, and it's just so simple, you may not know now, but later you'll understand, John 13:7. So thank you so much. That's my brief experience, and I'm looking forward to hearing from the experts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe. Wow. Dr. Dory Marshall is Chief Medical Officer at Oishei Children's Hospital and is a board-certified psychiatrist with clinical experience in treating adolescents and young adults with mental health challenges. She is also an associate professor of psychiatry at UB's medical school and holds several leadership positions in this field. Simply, she is an expert in this field, and she's one of your own, a member here at Calvary. Welcome, Dr. Marshall.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here. After hearing from both Mike and Joe and hearing them speak so openly about their own specific experiences with mental health struggles, I think it's important to reflect on a couple of things that I heard them share. Can you hear me, Mom? Okay. Okay. I think it's important to reflect on a couple of things that I heard them share, which are almost pathognomonic for why people delay seeking treatment for mental illness. First, there's their description of how their symptoms crept up and worsened slowly over time, started, and then over time got worse, which reflects that at first the symptoms may not have been the equivalent of a full-fledged disorder, but they grew into something akin to that. And then I heard that there was a little bit of a reaction from each of them, Mike and Joe, that they felt like if they just worked a little harder, pushed themselves a little bit more, that they would get through this, and just sort of bulldozing their way through life, that things would get better. I think that the way they were feeling felt foreign to both of them, but they didn't recognize that they were struggling with a mental health issue that might be treatable until they finally recognized that. And while I'm so grateful that each of them recognized they needed help, wouldn't it have been preferable to have recognized it sooner? Wouldn't it have been preferable to have not suffered for quite so long if a family member or a friend or a coworker, to Mike's point earlier, had asked the right questions and pushed and had prompted them to get into treatment? I'm going to briefly share another story to just drive this home because I think it illustrates the points that were just made. When I was early in my career, a colleague, another psychiatrist, came in to see me. She was going through a divorce. It was ugly. It was something I knew a little bit about. And she came in and sat down. This wasn't her coming to see me professionally. It was just coming in to check in and say hi. And she sat down and just said, "I am so exhausted." And I said, "What's going on?" And she said, "I am exhausted. I can't sleep. I go to bed at night. My thoughts are just racing. I'm just so anxious, flitting from one thing to the next." She's like, "I drag myself out of bed in the morning to get my son to school. And I go to work, but I really can't concentrate. I'm just so tired." She said, "The bills are piling up at home. I have a pile of bills. I can pay them. I've got the money, but I don't have the energy to open up the bill, write the check, put it back together, put the stamp on it, and send it in. I'm just exhausted. And I can't come up with a plan for how to organize things right now. I can't even think about my sister's wedding, which is in the summer. It's just too far away. I can't even think that far right now." She said she felt completely overwhelmed. She looked thin to me. I said, "Have you lost weight?" And she said, I cook every night because I have to feed my son, but I just don't have any appetite." I reached for my script pad and put it between the two of us. And she looked at me. Her eyes sort of widened. And I said, "Are you listening to yourself as closely as I am?" And she said, "Oh my God, I'm depressed." If a board-certified psychiatrist can miss the symptoms creeping in, is it any surprise that people outside of medicine do? Why don't people recognize that they have a treatable disorder? And how can we improve in terms of recognizing mental health disorders and getting help for the people who need it? Well, let's level set around some statistics. When we talk about mental illness, we are talking about a group of disorders with a lifetime prevalence in the United States of 46%. That's almost 1 out of 2 Americans. And when I talk about mental health disorders, I'm including substance use, I'm including depression, anxiety disorders, I'm including all of it. 1 out of 2. By comparison, the lifetime prevalence of cancer, all cancers, is about 40%, a little higher for men, a little lower for women. For anxiety disorders, panic, generalized anxiety disorder, social phobia, agoraphobia, OCD, we're talking about 29%. For depression, the lifetime prevalence is 15% for men, 26% for women. Bipolar disorders, about 1.9%, and schizophrenia disorders, about 1.2%. So why are we talking about these today? Why not cancer? Why not talk about diabetes or heart disease? Those are important things to talk about too, but somehow they're not shrouded in the secrecy that mental health disorders are. I mean, sure, people might not tell everybody if they're struggling with cancer diagnosis, but it's not because they feel a sense of shame. It's not because they feel less than or weak because they're struggling with depression or anxiety. And when we don't talk about them, we allow inadvertently people that we care about to suffer in silence. There's a ton of evidence that details the impact of mental illness on families, on relationships, on the loss of joy and meaning in life. A friend of my family's reached out to me. She sent me a very sweet letter saying that she had seen that we were having this talk today. And she said, I'm not going to come. It's just, it hits too close to home. But she said, please know that my family struggled with mental illness for so many years. And I wish that we had gotten treatment because we suffered as a family for so long. And we didn't get treatment that was available. Then there's lost productivity at work, sometimes resulting in loss of employment, which just makes the stressors worse. And then there's the stark reality that in these disorders, as we heard so poignantly from Mike, there's the real risk of suicide, and suicide rates are not falling. When we lose someone to suicide, that loss is preventable. The person who is gone did not die of natural causes, but they died of a treatable condition. And the pain and grief that their family and friends carry with them forever is devastating. As we are talking about these disorders, I think it's important to emphasize that there is a difference between symptoms that sometimes exist without a disorder being present, because symptoms alone aren't equal to a disorder. We almost all have psychologic symptoms that don't equal a disorder. Getting anxious before giving a presentation, feeling tearful over the war in Israel and Gaza, feeling the need to check that the doors are locked at least twice every night, feeling paranoid about being in one's home alone and worrying that someone might break in even though you live in a safe neighborhood. If, despite these symptoms, you are generally happy, content, and productive in your relationships and work, then you aren't struggling with a mental health disorder that needs treatment, per se. When those symptoms become, a significant focus of continual distress, or are impacting work relationships or home relationships, that's a different matter. So I think a quick shorthand for what may be a disorder is this. When an individual is having daily and noticeable distress over psychologic symptoms, or when the psychologic symptoms are making it difficult for that individual to function in their work life or their home life or their personal relationships, then there is likely something that needs to be treated. I'm going to give some examples ranging from depression scenarios, anxiety, and psychosis. And here again, I think we struggle to discern from a non-clinical standpoint when something crosses over from normal, either for the person or for a given situation, into abnormal. And I hope these examples help demonstrate what I'm talking about. Sadness, grief, loss, we all experience those things. How does this differ from what is depression? I had a friend ask me this a couple of weeks ago. She lost her adult daughter over the summer to an illness that came on very suddenly. And she and I were talking just over a week ago, and she said she was worried she might be depressed again. She had an appointment lined up with her psychiatrist and was wondering if she should ask to go back on medication. So we talked about it. And she described a few days earlier when she'd been out all day and got home and was looking at the pictures of her daughter from the funeral, when she burst into tears and sobbed uncontrollably for 20 minutes. The strength of her emotions frightened her, and she called another daughter and asked her to stay on the phone with her for a little bit. Eventually, she was able to calm herself, made a cup of tea, went to bed. So I asked her some questions. I asked her how she'd been sleeping. She said 8 to 10 hours a night. I asked about her schedule. She reads the newspaper cover to cover each morning. She goes out to lunch almost daily with friends and out to dinner almost nightly. She thinks about her daughter all the time. but she's functioning. She's planning weeks ahead with her friends and her family. She goes to physical therapy twice a week. And she was able to give me a rundown of everything that her friends are doing. Clearly able to concentrate day to day, minute to minute. She's functioning at a high level and is not in distress so great that she can't find many moments of comfort and even some happiness right now with her friends. She's concentrating okay. And I asked her, any thoughts about not wanting to be alive? Any thoughts about suicide? No, not at all. I could never do that to my family. It's not a thought in my head. So I didn't think that she was struggling with depression. I said, go see your psychiatrist, talk with him, let me know what he thinks, what you think, but I don't think you're struggling with depression right now. I think this is understandable, tremendous grief. A little bit different topic, baby blues. When we talk about people who've given birth, baby blues are mood swings immediately after and a few days to weeks after delivery. About 50% of people who deliver will have baby blues. I remember when I delivered my twins, just hours after I'd had them, I'm sitting on the bed, they're right next to me, and in this moment, I thought that them being outside of my body was sort of a metaphor for all the developmental changes that they were going to go through in their life. And all of a sudden, I had them graduating college, and I burst into tears, and I just sobbed. That did not continue. But for about 10 to 15% of women who give birth, or people who give birth, that does turn into a depression. And that's important to get treated. When people start losing sleep, when they start losing energy, when they can't concentrate and focus, when they can't take the best care of themselves or their children or their partners, then you're running into some dangerous territory. And it's really important for them to get treatment. And then for a very small subsection of people with postpartum depression, they can go into something that's an emergency, and that is postpartum psychosis. And that becomes an emergency because when someone who's given birth and is struggling with sleeping starts to hallucinate and starts to think things that are just not reality-based, you run the very real risk of suicide and infanticide. It's very uncommon, but it is something that we need to be aware of and we need to, talk about when we have someone who's given birth and is struggling with depression. What about anxiety? When does anxiety cross into something that needs to be treated? I remember a 12-year-old many years ago who was struggling with anxiety, and initially it was anxiety about school. It was anxiety about being in school. And in the anxiety about being in school, he eventually started resisting going to school. So mom was struggling to get the child into the car, struggling to drive the car without him getting out at stoplights, struggling to get him out of the car and into the building and calling the principal to come in and help. And eventually, the parents decided, we're going to homeschool the kid for the end of the year. Well, the problem was that this social anxiety grew into other domains. And so even when they tried to take the child to engage in other social activities with other homeschooled children, the child became so full of fear and went into fight or flight mode that the child tried to hurt themselves. And we ended up getting the child into treatment. But what started as, a normal anxiety symptom, some anxiety about school and relationships and people making fun of each other, grew into something that was really much bigger and needed care. And what about psychosis, which is primarily something that begins among young people? You might think about a 17-year-old boy who's not showering regularly. That can be a normal 17-year-old boy. What was normal and a nightly activity at some point in adolescence becomes something they want to control. And so you might have a 17-year-old who isn't showering every night. But it can be a symptom of something worse. And if that turns into the young person not showering for days or weeks on end, beginning to engage in self-talk, really retreating into himself, not making a lot of sense when talking to family members or saying things that don't seem to be grounded in reality, then that could be the start of a psychotic illness. And it's very important to get that young person in for treatment, because the earlier he's in treatment, the better the long-term prognosis. So to wrap up, I want to reiterate that mental health disorders are common and treatable. We need to recognize that psychologic symptoms can be normal and not pathologic, but that they can creep into the danger zone over time, and we shouldn't be afraid to ask the people we love and care about how they're feeling. And when we suspect they're struggling, we should ask them about how they're functioning at home and at work. If they aren't able to function as they normally do, that's a red flag that they need to be evaluated by a mental health professional. And we should encourage them with love to do so. And one more thing, I'm going to end on this and then let Mark talk. Don't be afraid to ask if someone is having any thoughts of wanting to be dead or contemplating suicide. There is no reason not to ask. If you have the thought, you're having that thought for a reason. So ask the question. And now I'll let Mark talk to you more about our local resources and other things. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Doctor. The story she was telling about her fellow psychiatrist reminded me of the times over 20 years when I would fall into the dark hole of depression, which could last for a few days, few weeks, a couple of months at times. And I called it managed depression, but anyone that saw me knew I was there because I didn't have my usual high energy. I would just get through the day with a huge desire for carbs and sugars and no exercise. Do that math and you see the end result. But also couldn't wait to get back under the covers. Luckily, one of my psychologists said, we have to come to an end on this. And when I would miss an appointment, she now has the right, and a friend of mine who I talk to call my wife, and then she'll call them, and, you know, I'll get out of it that way. That's where the communication comes in. The sad part about suicide, which I'm now convinced after interviewing a lot of people and family members that have had people unfortunately take their life, I think, and the doctor and Mark, the commissioner, could maybe verify this a little, but I think many, maybe up to 90% could be solved and not committed suicide if they would only bring those thoughts out. When I've seen families that have gone through, they had a walk last month, when someone is in that mode of thinking about suicide, they don't think of anything else. All they're thinking about is their life is useless, they're affecting everyone around them, no one likes them, I'd be better off gone. And what they don't realize is the wake they leave behind them of family, friends, that now will live a life wondering, was it something I said? Or what did I do to cause them to take their life? So it has some really long-lasting effects. Well, we also have the questions, and we have a number of them here, and they're very, very good. So anyone that has a question, fill it out. Owen is leading our team to pick them up and bring them up to Dell, and we'll have them right after our cleanup hitter for this afternoon is Erie County's Mental Health Commissioner. He's been a licensed clinical social worker for over 40 years throughout Western New York. He's held this title in 2 other counties in Western New York. He chairs the 8-county Regional Planning Consortium and is the former president and co-founder of Integrity Partners for Behavioral Health, IPA. He continues to hold a private practice treating survivors of physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, along with family and couple therapy. Ladies and gentlemen, Erie County Commissioner of Mental Health, Mark O'Brien.
Good morning. Mike, thank you for that, that great introduction. First of all, I want to welcome you to this, and it's great to see a turnout of folks like this. Somebody said, apologize early, we only have about 100 people. This is great. I've had these conversations with 6 people in the room, and to have you here to show this interest, this is that is terrific. That is fantastic. So I want to acknowledge my fellow speakers here. Let's give them a round of applause here. Can we? They're really awesome. Dr. Marshall, just thank you for really laying out what it is. I'm gonna add to that a bit. I've just met Baby Joe for the first time in the back. I have followed his career. I told him flat out, we in Buffalo own him. He is ours. He represented us in the best way possible, and he represents the best of Buffalo, and he represents the truest thought that I've used this term in mental health for over 43 years. I'm still learning. I'm still new at this. And what reminds me of it, doesn't matter how many times you get knocked down. It matters how many times you get up. And Joe, you are the walking example of that. And the other bit of courage that I want to acknowledge is my dear friend Mike Bellani, who shows just tremendous courage by showing up every day, and especially by showing up in those socks. Now, if that isn't courage, I don't know what is. So, you know, he talked about mental illness and brain trauma. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this because we had a conversation there, because the 3 of us are all members of the same club. Mike knew about that, but Joe found that out today. And it's funny because mental illness can be, and in my view, after all these years, mental illness to me is a physical illness with psychological symptoms. Whether you have a brain trauma or not, I'm going to talk a little bit about it and put it in some layman's terms. And with my head trauma, we talked about I was 12 years old. A cousin of mine came up and kicked me in the butt at my aunt's. He ran off. I ran off after him. We're just horsing around, and I never saw that overhanging laundry chute. Boom. Well, 44 stitches later, you know, it kind of knocks your head around a little bit, and then I had a couple other ones. I was fortunate because a different part of the brain, the parts that Joe had experienced and Mike experienced, caused certain emotional dysregulation that for Mike was misdiagnosed as bipolar. For me, if you think of your computer with certain files, the files are there, but the connections aren't there. So there's wholesale parts of memory gone. So none of the emotional dysregulation, but there's certain things, childhood or early marriage. My wife will say, do you remember this? I go, was I there? So the executive functions are there, so the brain is a funny thing. But we can talk about mental illness without any brain injuries. And I want to talk about that, but it's there's a big thing to realize, and certainly Dr. Marshall knows this better than anybody else. The difference between healthy and unhealthy can be summed up in one word: degree. What is healthy in a certain degree is very unhealthy in its overage or its absence. So when we talk about some of the most common mental health diagnoses and what to do about them, think about that. Because, for example, if you like to exercise, you do an hour or so a day or 2 days, but if you're doing 6, 7 hours a day, is there an issue there? Possibly. So we're looking at a number of things. There's all sorts of causes to mental illness. They could be organic. They could be genetic. Certain things runs in family. You will see histories of depression and anxiety that can run in families. You can see early life trauma run in families. Loss. Joe talked about the loss of his career. Well, he had invested all his life in that. Just think of all those hours in the gym. Everybody see the Rocky movies? We have our own Rocky right here. And all of a sudden that's taken away from them. That's a loss. Death, separation, things of those natures. So these are things that we look at. When I see somebody with anxiety, anxiety, people think about anxiety. I have anxiety. There's something wrong here. Well, think about it. Anxiety keeps you alive. You go to the red light and you pause for a moment because you see that car coming and you're not sure they're going to stop. You get a little anxious and they run the red light. You taking that extra second to wait for them to go may have just saved your life. So in absence of things is sometimes you see people going down roads that go, maybe you should have thought about that a little bit. It's in its overage for anxiety that it becomes crippling. And when I look at somebody with anxiety, I very much often look for an underlying depression that goes with that. And so they're kind of ugly twin sisters or brothers, if you want to look at that. Dr. Marshall talked about psychosis. I want to put it in very simple terms because there's a difference between a mental illness and a serious mental illness. And there are certain ones that you're going to see because she talked about certain statistics about how 1 in 5 people can have a diagnosable mental health episode at some point in your life. But there are certain illnesses that you'll see in very small portions, like schizophrenia, serious bipolar disorder, certain types of things that affect a much smaller ones. But there are symptoms that cross diagnoses. And one of them, she mentioned psychosis. So psychosis is simply this. Psychosis is a break with reality. But then you have to ask real quickly, what is reality? People say, well, it's what you think it is. And I go, no, it really isn't. Reality, I will give you a mental health definition of, is 3 things for the stool. That which can be observed, that which can be measured, and that to which there is communal consensual agreement. And you go, what's communal consensual agreement? Okay, what is today? Today is Sunday, November 1st, 2023, right? Oh, it's not? Oh, I'm sorry, did I miss that? What day is it?
You don't have any events on your calendar.
I didn't ask you. Okay, so it's October 29th, 2023. Does anybody here believe that the world started 23 years ago? So we are dated from something, and that is what? The birth of Christ, A.D., Anno Domini, the birth of our Lord. So across the planet, even though you still have the Jewish New Year, you have the Chinese New Year, you have certain calendars that go back, but the Gregorian calendar has been adopted. So we have communally agreed with that. So when you have a break with reality, that communal consensual agreement, then you're talking about psychosis. And one of the most common forms is delusions. A delusion is an unreal belief to which is not susceptible by reason of logic of talking them out of it. You believe something that's going to happen, but there's no basis in fact. A hallucination is a sensory reception to which there's no stimulus. You're seeing something that's not there. You're hearing something and nobody's talking to you. Okay? It could be touch, and it could be any of the senses, but those are 2 most common types of things. And you can see those in schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. You can see those in a major depression where it is so profound that you can have psychotic features with that. So when you hear psychosis, that's what it means. It is a break with reality. Dr. Marshall also talked about suicide. And talking about suicide is really important because suicide exists in darkness. It exists alone. If you feel or you think that somebody may be thinking about suicide, she's 100% right. Talk to them. Ask them. Use the word. Are you thinking about killing yourself? Are you thinking about committing suicide? Nobody has ever given anybody the idea of doing it who wasn't thinking about it. Are you thinking of hurting yourself? Are you thinking of killing yourself? That's a great idea. I never thought of that. You will not give anybody that thought, okay? And there are three things that you do not see when you see suicide: purpose, hope, and connection. And when you have those three things, because think about it, 95% of your relationships have come together because of purpose. Something brought you together. Look around you. You come to church. Church is you come to talk to God. You hope he's talking to you. That purpose brings you together. You came here today to hear some speakers. That purpose brought you together. Your friends from school. These things brought you together. And sometimes when the purpose leaves, some of the relationships stay, but a number of them don't. Those are the passages of life. For some of us, that can be seen as a loss. So purpose is very important when you see this. So, a quick definition here. You heard the terms mental health and mental illness, and sometimes you'll hear them interchangeably. So I'll give you a quick definition. Mental health is a state of well-being where a person can realize their abilities, cope with normal stresses in life, be productive in work and life, and can contribute to their community. That is not an absence of stress, and it is not an absence of feeling down or feeling anxious like this. It's you're within those normal limits. Mental illness is a health condition. It's a health condition. It's important to keep that in mind, because when Mike talked about stigmas we don't want to talk about. Mental illness, he doesn't want to talk about that thing. But it's a health condition. Same way diabetes, high blood pressure. It's a health condition that impacts a person's thinking, feeling, emotions, behaviors, and mood. And these can impact one person's ability to function. So Dr. Marsh talked about some of the prevalence. You'll hear about things of schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is a very debilitating illness. Affects 1% to 2% of the population. Its usual onset is somewhere between 18 and 23 for males, often a little later for females. And for the family around it, it's experienced like a death, because the person you know seems to be gone, and you see that shell of the person. And there's two types of symptoms you'll see with schizophrenia, and you will see with other ones. You'll see positive symptoms and negative symptoms. And that doesn't mean they're good and bad. If you have a cold, right? You get COVID, God forbid. You have a cold, you have a runny nose, sniffles, fevers. Those are positive symptoms because it's added something to you. But you can't get up. You're tired, you're listless, you're lethargic, you don't care. Those are negative symptoms. They've taken something away. In mental illness, it's the same type of thing. If you have mood dysregulation, if you're hearing voices, if you're in a manic phase means your mood is elevated. It means you're not sleeping. You may be hypersexed, gambling, poor judgment, talking at a rapid pace. Okay? That's added something. But your ability to interact is taken away. Those are negative symptoms. She talked about what causes mental illnesses. There's biological factors. We talked about head injuries, that's one thing. Family history. Mental illnesses can run in families. They absolutely can. Alzheimer's, you can see run in families, depression, anxiety, etc. Environmental factors, early life trauma, physical, emotional, sexual abuse. Neglect is huge. I deal with trauma survivors all the time. Sometimes they'll tell you the neglect is worse because at least when I'm being abused, somebody's paying attention to me. Bad attention, but somebody's still paying attention. What I tell you doesn't cause mental illness is personal weakness or character defects. You didn't do something wrong if you came down with a mental illness. Okay? All right. Warning signs of mental illness. Feeling sad, and these are all in the handouts back there. Okay? So feeling sad or withdrawn for more than 2 weeks. Trying to harm yourself or making plans to do so. Thoughts of hurting somebody else. Severe out-of-control risk-taking behavior. Sudden, overwhelming fear for no reason, sometimes with racing heart or physical discomfort. Okay, we're getting there. Give me about 2 minutes extra, okay? If I'm seeing somebody with an anxiety disorder, and anxiety disorders are very common, I'm looking for a couple things. I want to know what you're experiencing first. Are you experiencing a thought, some type of very uncomfortable thought? And that's the thing about anxiety disorders. Your rational mind goes, all right, wait a second, I know this is crazy, but you're still thinking it. Or are you experiencing it in your body? My heart's pounding, all that type of thing. That tells me something. What are you experiencing first? Even if it's only a millisecond first, because it tells me what to go after. Because if you're experiencing anxiety in your body, heart's pounding, racing, all that type of things, then I'm looking at how do you de-stress your body in terms of progressive muscle relaxation, all sorts of techniques that do the body. And they're easy to Google. If they're up here, then I'm looking at what are those thoughts types of things. And Dr. Marshall will tell you, because she's a trained psychiatrist, you want to get a couple things right. You're going after the thoughts, you're going after the behaviors, and when necessary, you're also going after the body chemistry. Because there are certain things that you are not going to need any medications for. And then there's certain times that medications are necessary to get the body chemistry right. So, we talked about stigma. We talked a bit about stress and anxiety. And everybody has stress. It's how we handle it. So, what to do when you're experiencing somebody who's got emotional distress? Look at their feelings of hopelessness. What are their actions? What are the changes that they're making in their life? Any threats they're making to self or other in situations? What do I do? Actively listen. Okay? Good Lord gave you 2 of these, 1 of these. Use these twice. Right? Allow them to feel, to unload their feelings. Active listening, when somebody hears you, they feel understood, they feel connected. Be sympathetic and non-judgmental. Offer hope. Take them seriously when they're talking about things. There's a whole thing, I won't go into it right now, there's a whole thing in the back in terms of what to do when spotting signs of suicide or you're concerned. Listen to your gut, okay? You're not going to hurt anybody by doing that. Resources. Erie County, our greatest strength is we have a lot of resources to coordinate. Our greatest weakness is we have a lot of resources to coordinate. So we have a whole system of outpatient mental health clinics. We have open access and urgent care walk-in types of situations. They're easy to find. 211 will get you there. There is a new app that came out from Erie County, Erie Path, that if you go to the App Store, it's a free download, Erie Path. There's a whole host of, there's about 1,300 informational pieces on diagnoses and a whole way to get you to help if you do that. We have inpatient beds over at ECMC. You have CPEP, the Comprehensive Psychiatric Emergency Program. But I would encourage folks that you don't go to CPEP unless you really need to, because there's all sorts of help in between that. And our system is, with getting help, is who to call, who can come, where to go, in that order. There's mobile hotlines. There's crisis services, 716-834-3131. There's 988. There's case management services, and there's all sorts of community education. So with that, I'm going to thank you for your time and attention, and we'll turn it over to this. I'm great at ignoring stop signs. Thank you.
Testing. Now, Commissioner, because constituents, and we will answer these questions. But we're going to start with, and Dr. and Mark, both of you, what have you seen changing during or because of the COVID pandemic? Changes in needs for health, changes in awareness, and how does it directly impact by either COVID illness or isolation? Yep, just to here.
Well, you know, it's COVID was a time when a lot of people stayed home. I at the time was working in a couple of places, but one of them was at Erie County Medical Center, and the inpatient service did not slow down one bit. I would say that during COVID, we saw young people in particular who were sicker than I've ever seen them. I think that, you know, the full story isn't out on COVID yet. I think for some children, for some teenagers, being home with parents every day and having time with family was actually, you know, a positive. That's something that in the busy, hectic lives that many of us lead, you know, children don't have time at home with their families and their parents. But for children who were in homes where there was only one caregiver, and that caregiver was a person who was an essential worker and had to be out of the house, that child was alone for great parts of the day, and the stress on that child, thinking about their parent, their caregiver getting COVID, you know, getting sick, maybe dying, was terrifying. So we had children who were sicker at earlier ages with disorders that just hadn't seen, you know, really to that extent for my career. I don't know if that's answering the question you asked for.
I would agree with everything Dr. Marshall said, and it shook everybody's foundation to the core. You wouldn't be doing this right now 2 years ago. And if you could, you're sitting here with masks. People who were healthy became ill. Parents died. Grandparents died. Children were afraid of losing, and people did lose. So, you know, people's foundation got really shaken to the core. I think we're in a better place. We would like to be done with COVID. I'm not sure that COVID is done with this, but it really has rocked a lot of foundations for kids. And kids need to know that the things they were relying on are still there, and they're going to be safe.
Thank you, Mark. Dr. Marshall, speak about how social media has affected the upsurge in teen suicide, especially among girls ages 12 to 16.
So what I can't do is quote numbers to you, but what I can say is that when I started my career in psychiatry, suicide rates were down, and they've just gone up for adolescents. And I will tell you another thing. When I was growing up, there was a phone in the kitchen. It was on the wall, and there were rules around how to use the phone. You could use it until 9 o'clock at night, and you could use it after 9 in the morning. You couldn't call people at 2 in the morning. And when I got on the school bus and went home, the social interactions and the busyness went away. I got home, and I know I'm just telling you what you all know. Got home, we could relax. Our kids, you know, because of this, and there are positives to cell phones, and there are positives to social media. Don't get me wrong, I don't see things as all black or white. But what children don't have with these is a downtime. They do not have a downtime when they get home. Bullying continues into the night. Inappropriate texting, inappropriate outreach. I've had so many 16-year-old girls who are trying to be a therapist to a friend who's at home cutting at 2 in the morning. How is that healthy for a 16-year-old? How is that healthy for anyone? The child who's at home in distress should be going to her parents or his parents. So I think that social media has really made it impossible for our kids to get downtime, and that's a constant stress for them.
Commissioner, on that same topic, youth mental wellness is a significant concern and appears to be driven by non-medical influences. What are some resources to help our youth?
Well, first of all, we can't medicalize everything. Just because somebody's having issues doesn't mean everybody needs treatment. There's an old saying, 100 years from now, it doesn't matter what clothes I wore, what car I drove, what clubs I attended. But 100 years from now, it will matter that I made a difference in the life of a child. And so, relationships are the currency that we all thrive on. So, I would say, first of all, I would point you back to the Erie Path app. It's just loaded with resources. And again, it's a free download, and everything imaginable in the county that's related to youth services you can find in there. But keep in mind the other things that keep kids grounded is the relationships with parents, the relationships with friends, involvement in activities, involvement in sports, music, what have you. The things that were tried and true back then are still tried and true now, with the exceptions that Dr. Marshall talked about, because that little computer in your pocket really has changed the world.
Thank you, Commissioner. Joe, as a former boxer, what do you think of the future of boxing? There's so much emphasis on sports these days on the dangers of concussions, and boxing seems to be all about concussion.
That's a good question. I had some friends over yesterday for a pay-per-view boxing event, and I get asked often, I could be pumping gas or going at the bank, and just boxing questions, sports related, but I love the sport of boxing. I just love it and love what it's done for me in my life. I don't care for the business of boxing. I have nothing really to do with the sport, and people ask me all the time, go to the gym, where can my son go, this and that, and I politely answer the question and will recommend. But I feel I'm blessed for what boxing has given to me, but I don't want to hang my hat on it either. I have more to offer this world, and I love the sport, and I make my wife fall asleep to it 3 nights a week. She has no choice. I love watching it. I like to follow it. But I don't manage fighters, I don't train fighters, I don't have a gym, and I don't attend fights, and that's just, I don't care to. The business of it is very difficult and challenging, and I wouldn't recommend it really for most people, but I am an advocate for safety. I do speak at medical conferences, and again, I have nothing clinical to it, but I just share my experience to head injuries. And I have become an advocate, whether it's for the NFL or head injuries in general, and just sharing my experience. I think that my case of my head injury was somewhat ridiculous for them to ban me from the sport. Any boxer at my level, at a contender level, has had a subdural hematoma. That's basically a fact. So to say if you have a subdural hematoma, you can never compete again, that rule shouldn't be so black and white, because if an MRI was taken after most fights, you'd probably find a small bleed. After most, not most fights, but it's more common than you think. So I think rules need to be changed, and if I had any involvement in boxing, it would be involved in that, working with these state athletic commissions and change the rules. MRIs should be more common. They should be after fights, not before the fights. Just little things, and to say the Evander Holyfield and Mike Tyson's and Oscar De La Hoya's, all they used in boxing, never suffered a small bleed would be ridiculous. They never got caught, I did. But nonetheless, probably saved my life, so there's that hand too. So the fact that mine was identified, so I'm very grateful at the same time. But I'm still going to be an advocate for other young athletes and to be cautious and not do any contact sports until the appropriate age.
Thanks, Joe. To either Commissioner or Doctor, number one, why is there such a large percentage of people suffering from mental illness? And number two of that is why is it so hard to get a mental health specialist when they need one?
Well, I'll take a shot at both and then turn it over to Dr. Marshall. I'm not sure, of course, we talk about COVID and how that really has affected just about literally everybody. And that really did exacerbate a number of things. But I think also there is a greater recognition now of mental health diagnoses, mental illness, mental health concerns. So is it a greater proportion, or is it being recognized and coming out of the closet, as it were, out of the darkness? I think maybe in some ways it's probably a good thing. You know, you hate to say this, but during COVID, the number of child protection reports went down. Does anybody think that the number of child abuse incidents went down? No. The number went down because the kids didn't have access to teachers and the people who could see and do these types of things. So you would think that would be a great type of thing that the number went down, but really, it really wasn't. Some of the things that in terms of, it is harder to, and sometimes to access mental health services. First of all, Dr. Marshall will absolutely tell you, I believe that there is a huge shortage